The sound of shattered glass echoed through the royal hallway. A young palace maid dropped to her knees instantly, trembling as pieces of the crystal vase scattered across the marble floor. Oh no, she whispered, her hands shaking. Footsteps approached. Heavy ones. Royal guard footsteps. The girl lowered her head quickly, expecting the worst. Because in the kingdom of Valerian, servants were not allowed to make mistakes, especially not in the palace. My apologies. I'm so sorry, she murmured quickly. But instead of anger, a calm voice spoke. Are you hurt? The maid looked up in shock. Standing before her was Prince Adrian, the only son of the king. Tall, calm, dressed in royal blue, yet looking nothing like the arrogant nobles who ruled the palace. The girl froze. I didn't see you coming, Your Highness, she stammered. Prince Adrian crouched down and began picking up the broken glass. The hallway guards exchanged confused looks. A prince, cleaning a servant's mistake. The maid hurried to stop him. Please, Your Highness. You shouldn't. But Adrian raised his hand gently. Relax, he said. It's only glass. The girl swallowed nervously. My name is Amina, she said quietly. And that was the moment everything began. The maid nobody noticed. Amina had worked in the palace for 3 years. She woke before sunrise every day. While nobles slept in silk beds, she scrubbed the palace floors. While the royal family ate breakfast, she cleaned the kitchen. While the kingdom celebrated festivals, she washed piles of laundry. Yet no one ever truly saw her. To the nobles, she was invisible. Just another servant, but Prince Adrian noticed something different. Over the next few days, he began seeing Amina everywhere. In the garden, carrying water buckets twice her size. In the hallway, helping an elderly servant climb the stairs. In the kitchen, giving her own meal to a younger worker who hadn't eaten. She never complained. Never asked for attention. And strangely, that fascinated the prince more than anything. Because inside the palace, kindness was rare. The lonely prince. Despite his royal title, Prince Adrian was lonely. The nobles who surrounded him only cared about power. Every conversation was about alliances, politics, and wealth. Even his mother, the queen, constantly reminded him of his duty. You will soon marry a princess from a powerful kingdom, she told him often. Your marriage will strengthen our throne. But Adrian hated the idea. Marriage without love. A political arrangement. A golden cage. So whenever he could escape, he wandered the palace gardens. And that was where he saw Amina again. She was kneeling beside the fountain, washing royal linens, humming softly. The melody floated gently through the garden. Adrian paused. It was the first peaceful moment he'd felt all day. He stepped closer. You sing beautifully. Amina gasped and quickly stood up. Your Highness. She bowed so quickly that water splashed everywhere. Adrian chuckled softly. You don't have to look so terrified. I'm not terrified, she said quickly. Then she paused. Maybe a little. For the first time in weeks, the prince laughed. A real laugh. A moment that changed everything. Days passed. Then one afternoon, something terrifying happened. The palace courtyard suddenly erupted in screams. A royal horse had broken loose from the stables. The massive animal galloped wildly across the courtyard, knocking over carts and guards. Servants ran in every direction. But near the center of the courtyard stood a small girl, frozen in fear. The child couldn't move. The horse was charging straight toward her. Move, someone screamed. But the girl remained frozen. Prince Adrian watched from the palace balcony, his heart pounding. He was too far away. Then suddenly, the horse thundered closer. 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 At the very last second, Amina grabbed the child and rode across the ground just as the horse raced past. The courtyard fell silent. Guards finally caught the animal. But everyone was staring at Amina, the maid who had just risked her life. Prince Adrian rushed downstairs. When he reached the courtyard, Amina was dusting dirt from her clothes while comforting the crying child. "You're safe," she whispered gently. Adrian stared at her in amazement. "You could have been killed," he said. Amina shrugged softly. "But she would have been." The prince didn't know what to say. Because in that moment, he realized something powerful. While nobles in the palace talked endlessly about honor and courage, a simple maid had just shown more bravery than any of them. The beginning of something dangerous. After that day, Prince Adrian could not stop thinking about Amina. He found reasons to pass the servant halls, reasons to visit the gardens, reasons to speak with her. And slowly, conversations turned into friendship. Friendship turned into something deeper. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the palace towers, Adrian finally asked the question that had been on his mind. "Amina, are you happy working here?" She paused. The question surprised her. Then she smiled faintly. "I'm grateful." "That's not the same as happy," Adrian replied. Amina looked toward the distant village beyond the palace walls. "My mother is sick," she said quietly. "My wages help keep her alive." The prince felt a weight in his chest. For the first time, he understood how different their worlds were. But strangely, that difference made him admire her even more. The rumors began. Unfortunately, the palace was a place where secrets never stayed hidden. Servants whispered. Guards noticed. And soon, the rumors reached the royal court. The prince spends time with a maid. The prince walks the gardens with her. The prince laughs with her. When the queen finally heard the news, her reaction shook the palace. She slammed her hand on the royal table. "A maid," she shouted. "My son will marry a queen, not a servant." But the most dangerous reaction came from someone else. A powerful noble sitting quietly in the council chamber. Lord Victor. His daughter had been promised to the prince. And now, a maid was threatening everything. Victor's eyes narrowed slowly. "If the prince wants a maid," he whispered, "then we will show the kingdom exactly who she really is." And far away in the servant quarters, Amina had no idea that the most powerful enemies in the kingdom had just begun plotting her downfall. The palace had many secrets. Behind its golden walls, whispers traveled faster than the wind. And now, the newest whisper was spreading through every corridor. "The prince is in love with a maid." Servants murmured about it while washing dishes. Guards joked about it during night watch. Even royal advisors were beginning to notice. But the person most disturbed by the rumor was Queen Helena. She paced back and forth inside the royal chamber, her silk gown sweeping across the marble floor. "This cannot be happening," she said sharply. Across the room stood Prince Adrian, calm but firm. "She is not just a maid," he replied. "She is kind, brave, and wiser than most nobles in this palace." The queen scoffed. "Kindness does not make a queen." Adrian looked directly at his mother. "Maybe that is exactly what makes a queen." The queen's expression hardened. "You will marry Princess Elena of Riveria. The alliance has already been discussed." But Adrian shook his head slowly. "I will not marry someone I do not love." For the first time in years, the royal chamber felt like a battlefield. And standing outside the chamber door, listening quietly, was Lord Victor. A slow smile spread across his face. Because this conflict was exactly what he needed. The noble's dangerous plan. Later that night, Lord Victor invited several powerful nobles to his mansion. Candles flickered across the long dining table as the men leaned closer, speaking in low voices. "This maid has bewitched the prince," one noble muttered. "It is an embarrassment to the entire kingdom." Victor sipped his wine slowly. "No," he said calmly. "It is an opportunity." The nobles looked confused. Victor leaned forward. "If the prince insists on loving a maid, then we will simply prove to the kingdom that she is unworthy." "And how will we do that?" another noble asked. Victor's smile turned colder. "By destroying her reputation." Amina's growing fear. Meanwhile, Amina had begun noticing something strange. Servants who once smiled at her now avoided her. Guards whispered whenever she passed. Even the kitchen staff seemed uncomfortable. One evening, her closest friend in the servant quarters pulled her aside. "Be careful," the girl whispered nervously. "People are saying dangerous things about you." "What things?" Amina asked. Her friend hesitated. "They say you're trying to trap the prince, to become rich." Amina felt her chest tighten. "That's not true." "I know," her friend said quickly. "But the palace doesn't care about truth. It cares about power." For the first time since meeting Prince Adrian, Amina felt afraid. The prince's promise. Later that night, Adrian found her in the palace garden. She was sitting beside the fountain, staring quietly at the water. "You heard the rumors," he said gently. Amina nodded. "You shouldn't talk to me anymore," she said softly. The prince frowned. "Why would I do that?" "Because I'm causing trouble for you." Adrian sat beside her. "You didn't cause anything." "Yes, I did," she whispered. She looked down at her hands. "I'm just a servant." Adrian turned toward her family. "You are not just anything." He paused. Then he said something that changed everything. "I love you." The words hung in the air like a heartbeat. Amina's eyes widened in shock. The prince had never said it before. "I want to marry you," he continued. Her heart began racing. "Adrian, that's impossible." "Why?" "Because the kingdom will never accept me." Adrian's voice became steady. "Then the kingdom will learn." The queen's fury. Unfortunately, the palace walls had ears. And when the queen learned about Adrian's intentions, her anger shook the entire royal court. The next morning, she summoned Amina to the throne hall. Amina entered nervously, bowing deeply. Queen Helena stared down at her from the throne. "So," the queen said coldly, "you are the girl who thinks she deserves my son?" Amina shook her head quickly. "I never said that, Your Majesty." "But you encourage him," the queen replied. "No, Your Majesty. I tried to stop him." The queen studied her carefully. Amina's clothes were simple. Her hands showed the rough marks of hard work. Nothing about her looked royal. "You are a servant," the queen said sharply. "Yes, Your Majesty. And servants do not marry princes." The hall fell silent. Amina bowed her head. "I understand." Then she said something that surprised everyone. "If loving the prince harms this kingdom, I will walk away." The court murmured in shock. Queen Helena narrowed her eyes. "You would give up the prince?" Amina swallowed. "Yes." Not because she didn't love him, but because she refused to destroy his future. For the first time, the queen looked uncertain. The king's decision. Later that evening, the king called for a private meeting. King Aldrich was known as a wise ruler. He listened to both the queen and the prince. Then he spoke slowly. "This situation cannot continue like this." The prince leaned forward. "I want to marry Amina." The queen shook her head. "Absolutely not." The king raised his hand. "Enough." He stood up from his throne. "If the prince truly believes this girl deserves to become part of the royal family, then she must prove herself." Adrian frowned. "What do you mean?" The king looked toward the doors. Bring the girl. Guards escorted Amina into the throne room again. She bowed nervously. The king studied her carefully. You may be kind, he said. But kindness alone cannot rule a kingdom. Amina nodded quietly. I understand. The king walked down from the throne. If you wish to marry my son, you will face 3 tests. The entire court leaned forward. If you succeed, the kingdom will accept you. And if I fail? Amina asked softly. The king's voice became serious. Then you will leave the palace forever. Amina's heart pounded. This was the moment that would decide everything. The king raised his hand. Your first test begins tomorrow. But across the room, Lord Victor sat quietly with a satisfied smile. Because he already had a plan to make sure she failed. The palace courtyard was filled with people the next morning. Nobles, guards, servants, and royal advisors gathered in a wide circle. Word had spread quickly. The maid who wanted to marry the prince would face the king's 3 tests. Some came out of curiosity. Some came to mock her. And some secretly hoped she would fail. Standing at the center of the courtyard, Amina felt hundreds of eyes staring at her. Her hands trembled slightly. Across the courtyard, Prince Adrian stood watching her with concern. But beside him sat the queen, her expression cold and unreadable. Then the great palace doors opened. King Adric stepped forward. The entire courtyard fell silent. Amina, the king announced, his voice echoing across the stone walls. You claim to love my son and wish to become part of this royal family. Amina bowed respectfully. Yes, your majesty. The king nodded slowly. Then you must prove that you can serve this kingdom, not just the prince. He turned toward the crowd. The first test will begin now. The first test, wisdom. 2 angry merchants were brought into the courtyard. They immediately began shouting. She stole from me. He's lying. The crowd murmured as the men argued loudly. The king raised his hand. These merchants have been fighting over the same piece of land for months, he explained. No judge has been able to settle their dispute. Then he turned toward Amina. Your first test is simple. Resolve their conflict fairly. Gasps spread through the crowd. Even experienced judges had failed to settle the argument. And now a maid was expected to succeed. Lord Victor leaned back in his chair, hiding a smile. This would be entertaining. Amina stepped closer to the merchants. Instead of interrupting them, she listened quietly as both men shouted their stories. One claimed the land belonged to his family. The other insisted he had purchased it legally. The argument grew louder and louder. Finally, Amina raised her hand. May I ask a question? The men stopped arguing. Who planted the large mango tree on the land? She asked. The first merchant immediately answered. My father planted it when I was a boy. The second merchant stayed silent. Amina nodded slowly. Then she turned to the king. Your Majesty, the land should belong to the man whose family planted the tree. The court murmured in surprise. Why? The king asked. Amina looked toward the merchants. A person who truly owns land usually cares enough to plant something that will grow for generations. She paused. But someone who only bought land for profit may not. The king studied the merchants carefully. Finally, the second merchant lowered his head. She's right, he admitted quietly. I bought the land hoping to sell it later. The courtyard erupted in shocked whispers. The king raised his hand again. The first test is passed. Prince Adrian exhaled in relief. But across the courtyard, Lord Victor's smile slowly disappeared. The second test, compassion. Later that afternoon, the king announced the second challenge. Amina will leave the palace for 7 days, he declared. She will live among the poorest villagers in our kingdom. The nobles exchanged confused looks. When she returns, the king continued, she must present a plan to improve their lives. Amina bowed. I accept. But that night, Lord Victor quietly met with several corrupt guards. You know what to do, he told them. Because Victor had a secret plan. If Amina failed the second test, the prince would be forced to forget her. The village of Broken Hope. The next morning, Amina traveled to a small village far outside the capital. Prince Adrian watched her carriage disappear down the road, worry filling his chest. He wanted to protect her. But the king's rules were strict. She had to face the test alone. Meanwhile, Amina arrived at the village. What she saw broke her heart. Small houses made of broken wood. Children playing in dusty streets without shoes. Farmers struggling to grow crops in dry soil. Amina spent the entire week talking to the villagers. She listened to their problems. Their fears. Their hopes. And slowly, she realized something important. The villagers weren't lazy or careless. They simply lacked water. The nearest river was miles away. Without water, their crops failed every year. Without crops, they remained poor. By the end of the week, Amina had an idea. But she had no idea someone was secretly working against her. The sabotage. On the sixth night, a group of men quietly entered the village. They were the guards Lord Victor had bribed. Their mission was simple. Destroy Amina's plan before she returned to the palace. They burned several village crop fields during the night. By morning, the village was in chaos. Farmers cried as they watched their only food source turn to ash. Amina stood in shock. Her heart broke for the villagers. But instead of giving up, she helped them rebuild. She organized the villagers to dig a long irrigation trench that would connect their land to a nearby stream. Everyone worked together. Men, women, even children. By sunset, water finally flowed into the village fields. For the first time in years, the crops had a chance to survive. They returned to the palace. 7 days later, Amina returned to the royal court. The throne hall was packed. Everyone wanted to hear her answer. The king looked at her carefully. Tell us what you learned. Amina stepped forward. The villagers are hardworking people, she said. They simply need access to water. She described her irrigation plan clearly. If the kingdom builds small water channels across the farming regions, thousands of villages can grow crops again. The royal advisors began whispering. It was a simple idea, but incredibly effective. The king nodded slowly. The second test is passed. The crowd erupted in surprised murmurs. Even the queen looked impressed. But Lord Victor sat frozen in his chair. His sabotage had failed. And now only one test remained. The final test. The one that would decide whether a maid could truly become a princess. The palace throne room had never been this crowded before. Nobles filled the golden hall. Servants lined the walls. Even guards stood shoulder to shoulder along the entrance. Everyone had come to witness the final test. Because by sunset, the kingdom would know the answer to one question. Could a maid truly become a princess? At the center of the hall stood Amina. Her simple dress contrasted sharply with the glittering gowns of the nobles around her. But her posture was calm. Across the hall, Prince Adrian watched her with quiet determination. And beside him sat Queen Helena, still uncertain about the girl who had shaken the entire kingdom. Finally, the massive doors opened. King Aldrich entered the throne hall. The room fell silent instantly. He slowly walked toward the throne, then turned to face the court. Amina, he said. You have passed the first test of wisdom. You have passed the second test of compassion. The crowd murmured. But the final test, the king continued, is the most important one. Amina raised her head slightly. The king's eyes rested on her. The final test is honesty. The final question. The king stepped down from the throne again. His footsteps echoed across the marble floor as he approached Amina. Answer me truthfully, he said. Why should a maid become the wife of a prince? The entire hall leaned forward. This was the question everyone wanted answered. Amina stayed silent for a moment. She looked around the room. At the nobles who doubted her. At the servants who quietly supported her. At Prince Adrian, whose future depended on her answer. Then she spoke. I should not become a princess because I am a maid. The crowd immediately erupted in whispers. Even the queen looked surprised. But Amina continued. I should only become a princess if I can serve this kingdom better than someone born into power. The room slowly fell silent again. Amina took a deep breath. I know I was not born into royalty. I was not raised in luxury. But I understand the struggles of the people who live outside these palace walls. Her voice grew stronger. I understand hunger. I understand hardship. And I understand that a ruler's duty is not to sit above the people. She looked directly at the king. But to lift them up. The throne room became completely silent. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the king slowly nodded. You have answered wisely. Prince Adrian smiled in relief. But suddenly, a voice interrupted from across the hall. She is lying. All eyes turned. Lord Victor had stood up from his seat. His face burned with anger. This girl is manipulating the entire court, he shouted. She pretends to be humble, but she is nothing more than an ambitious servant. The nobles began whispering again. Victor pointed directly at Amina. She has already committed crimes inside this palace. The king's expression hardened. What crimes? Victor stepped forward dramatically. The royal jewels from the queen's chamber were stolen weeks ago. Gasps filled the hall. And witnesses saw the maid near the chamber that night. The queen's face went pale. She had never revealed that secret publicly. The accusation hung in the air like a thundercloud. Amina stood frozen. She had never stolen anything. But she realized something terrifying. This was the trap Victor had been waiting to spring. Prince Adrian immediately stepped forward. That is a lie. But Victor raised his hand calmly. Search her quarters, he said. If the jewels are found there, the truth will be obvious. The king turned toward the guards. Search the room. The throne hall became painfully quiet. Minutes passed. Then the guards returned. One of them held a small velvet box. Gasps exploded across the court. Inside the box was the missing royal jewel. Prince Adrian stared in disbelief. This is impossible. The queen looked heartbroken. Even the king seemed deeply troubled. Amina, he said quietly. Do you have anything to say? Tears filled her eyes. I did not steal that jewel. But suddenly, a small voice echoed from the back of the hall. Wait. Everyone turned. A young girl pushed her way through the crowd. It was Lina, the same child Amina had saved from the runaway horse months earlier. I saw something, the girl said nervously. The king leaned forward. What did you see? The girl pointed toward one of the royal advisors standing beside Lord Victor. I saw him sneaking into the servants' quarters 2 nights ago. The advisor's face turned pale instantly. The king's eyes narrowed. Guards. Within minutes, the man was dragged forward. Under pressure, he began trembling. Then he confessed. Lord Victor had ordered him to hide the jewel in Amina's room. The entire throne hall erupted in outrage. Prince Adrian's fist clenched. You tried to destroy her. Victor's face twisted with rage as the truth spread through the court. The king rose slowly from his throne. Lord Victor, he said. You attempted to frame an innocent woman and manipulate the royal court. Victor tried to defend himself. For the honor of the kingdom. Enough. The king's voice thundered across the hall. Strip him of his titles. Gasps filled the room. Confiscate his lands. Guards immediately seized Victor. As he was dragged away, his angry voice echoed through the palace. This kingdom will regret choosing a servant. But no one listened anymore. Because the truth had finally been revealed. The wedding that changed the kingdom. Days later, the palace celebrated a wedding unlike any in its history. The entire kingdom gathered in the royal courtyard. Farmers, merchants, soldiers, and servants stood side by side. Prince Adrian waited at the altar. Then the palace doors opened. Amina walked slowly down the aisle. But she was no longer just a maid. She had proven her courage, her wisdom, and her heart. The king placed her hand into Adrian's. From this day forward, the royal priest announced, You are husband and wife. Cheers erupted across the kingdom. For the first time in royal history, a palace maid had become a princess. And as the celebration continued, Prince Adrian whispered softly to her. You see, the kingdom didn't need another noble. He smiled warmly. It needed someone like you. Amina looked out at the cheering people. And in that moment, she realized something powerful. Her story had never been about becoming a princess. It had always been about proving that greatness can come from anywhere. Even from a simple palace maid.